What we're going to do is to see the hand of God working among the nations, working out his plan and purpose. And since the prophecy day, in the last few months, have been extremely busy. The angels have been working overtime behind the scenes to ensure that the nations are in their appropriate spot, so that when at last all things reach their climax, every piece of the jigsaw will be in its place. And it's our privilege to be able to see so many of those pieces dropping into place. So we're going to look at Britain, Israel and the Middle East. So we're going to start with Israel. On March the 17th, this seems a long time ago now, doesn't it? But they have their elections, and Benjamin Netanyahu, much later, formed, on May the 6th, formed a coalition government. With Israeli politics, it always is very difficult to form a government. There are so many different parties with their own individual aspects, and there is no one party big enough to dominate the politics of Israel. And so always there is a mad scramble after the elections to form a coalition. And he just managed it. He was given a 3-week extension, and just a few hours before that deadline expired, he announced his cabinet, the grouping that was going to form the government. Now, his party gained 30 seats. This went right against the pollsters. They had forecast that he would lose out, that the party was going to lose seats. And there was much rejoicing around the world. Obama was very happy with the thought that Netanyahu wouldn't be able to form a government, he wouldn't be in government, and this pleased the Americans as it pleased the Europeans. But that was not to be. It wasn't in God's hand that this should happen. And so, exactly like in the British elections, the pollsters got it completely wrong, and he emerged with the strongest party with 30 seats. And so he had to then get a grouping together. There are 120 seats, so he needed a minimum of 61 seats to be able to form a majority. So he did this by putting together various right-wing parties. The Jewish Home added 8 seats, the Shash added another 7, and the United Torah Judaism another 6, and then finally, quite a surprise, the Kalanu. I don't suppose I've anywhere near pronounced them correctly, but never mind. But with those together, that brought him to his 61-seat coalition, and so he had 51% of the seats in the government. Now, this amalgam of religious parties has really upset not only Obama, but the EU, because these parties are very much on the viewpoint that we cannot negotiate with the Palestinians. The idea of having a Palestinian state is anathema to most of these parties. And it's quite interesting just to pull together some of the statements which those parties have made. So his own party said emphatically, no Palestinian state at the moment. There is nobody to negotiate with. The Kalanu have a very hard line on security issues, and of course to have a Palestinian state in the middle of Israel would cause tremendous security issues. And the Jewish Home just opposes any idea of having a Palestinian state. Shash, very similar to Likud, there's nobody we can negotiate with at the moment, so there's no point in talking about it. And the United Torah Judaism, the land was given by God to the Jews, therefore, in their eyes, there is no place for a Palestinian state. So this has brought together, much to the surprise of the pollsters, much to the chagrin of America and the EU, a religious-leaning Israeli government. And as we shall see, this surely is in God's hand. Israel has to be isolated. It is because of the religiousness of Israel that the nations come against her. It is to drive them out and to replace the Jewish presence in Jerusalem with a Christian presence That's the whole purpose of the coming invasion. And so it is necessary that over the years the nation of Israel has changed from being a secular state to an increasingly religious one. And now we have quite a religious government which will dictate policy. Interestingly, just at this time, the Vatican is piling on pressure as far as a Palestinian state is concerned. And this was rather a provocative statement in the trumpet. Why is the Pope provoking war in Israel? First Cuba, now the Palestinians. Pope Francis is a man on a mission. But what is his mission exactly? The rhetoric and body language, the gracious gestures, the incessant smiles and compliments give the impression of a selfless leader determined to broker peace, cooperation and tranquility. In Cuba, Israel and all over this chaotic, disunited planet. But consider the decisions and actions. In both Cuba and Israel, the Vatican is creating tension, disunity and instability that are likely to lead to conflict and war. Yesterday, this is back in May, the Vatican revealed that it had formally recognised the state of Palestine in a newly finalised treaty with the Palestinians. The treaty defines the Roman Catholic Church's activities in areas controlled by the Palestinians and will be signed by both sides this Saturday when Abbas visits the Vatican. Critics of Israel and patrons of the Palestinian statehood are elated. The movement to recognise a Palestinian state has gained momentum in recent years, and particularly within the United Nations. An endorsement from the Pope and the Vatican is huge. Time will tell, but gaining the support of the most respected and admired leader on earth could be just what is needed to get the project of the Palestinian statehood over the finish line. For the Jewish state and its declining number of supporters, the Vatican's decision was an enormous blow. So this was the first time that the Vatican has legally recognised that there is a Palestinian state. We know there isn't a Palestinian state. There isn't such a thing as a Palestinian state. But this is what the nations are talking about. And here the Pope has lent his backing to it. And so this was done just prior to the visit of Abbas to the Pope. On the 16th of May, he went and visited. And there were many column inches devoted to the fact that the Pope had allegedly called him an angel of peace, which he is far from. But that was a mistranslation of the Latin. What the Pope actually had said, in fairness to him, you could be an angel of peace, which of course is quite a different context. But the fascinating thing were the closing words that Abbas spoke to the Pope. We will always be together because our mission is the same. What a remarkable statement. And the Pope replied, pray for me. So we know what the Palestinians' mission is. It is a Palestinian state which is Jew-free, Judan-free. That's what he's seeking. If they have a Palestinian state, all Jews will be expelled. They will not be allowed there. And that is step one to eventually causing the whole region between the Mediterranean and the Jordan River to be Jew-free. That is his aim. He said to the Pope, our mission is the same. How interesting. Now, we know that that will not take place. Or if it does take place, it has to be undone. A bit like we thought that Britain wouldn't go into the EU. But it did, but it's got to come out. Because we know at the final time of the end, Israel is dwelling on the mountains of Israel. Ezekiel 38 makes it quite clear that Israel is there on the mountains of Israel. And there's quite a stylistic map, but it gives us, you can see the outline of the West Bank where the Palestinian state would be established. And it says of Israel that they're dwelling on the mountains of Israel in the midst of the land. So it looks, and especially with this new government, that there will be every resistance to giving up territory to a Palestinian state. It will not happen. Interestingly, on the West Bank, are where the settlers are. And these Jewish settlers, who only occupy a very comparatively small percentage of the area, it's been estimated less than 1% the settlers occupy, and yet when you read the press you would think that they occupy a vast amount of space in the West Bank, but only 1%. But these are the Jews who have a religious zeal, not all of them, but a vast majority, who are looking for Messiah to come, understand that God is working in their nation, that there is a plan and a destiny for them. And these surely are the Jewish people who will be the ones that Elijah, when he performs his work before the Battle of Armageddon, when he goes to bring about a reformation in Israel, these are the kind of places that he will go to. So that was Jewish elections. And the following day was the UK elections, and there were some remarkable parallels between the situation in Israel and the situation in the UK. In both situations, the pollsters got it completely wrong. And this was the headline in the BBC. You know, why did political pollsters get it so wrong? Because they have forecast that the Conservative Party wouldn't get a majority. The SNP in Scotland, they've correctly forecast that, they'll get a lot of seats, and together with Labour will be able to form a coalition government. Well, that was not to be, because the angels had their plans, and in the mercy of God we have had our eyes open to those plans, that Britain has a role to play which is independent of the EU. She has a role to play in the Middle East with Israel and the southern Arab nations. And so Britain has to be forced out of the EU. And if Labour had got back in with SNP support, then Britain would be very firmly tied to the EU. Now we're in an interesting situation. We shall see how it all works out, but somehow Britain will find herself pushed out of the central core of the EU. No doubt Britain will form a trading alliance with the EU, but interesting time ahead. In fact, the markets were so alarmed at the thought that the Conservatives wouldn't get in, that the market slumped. Billions were wiped off the share market. But when it suddenly emerged that, yes, the Conservatives had got back in, then there was a big surge again. So these were the results, again, exactly like in Israel, though without a coalition, the Conservatives had 51% of the seats. And again, the pollsters were so completely wrong. And again, the European leaders had been rejoicing in the thought that this was the end of the conservatism, and things would then drift their way, and they had a rude awakening when these results came out. And the map of Britain was quite changed. The Labour Party severely routed, and especially in Scotland. And so many leaders, we've forgotten about some of them, haven't we? They soon fade off the scene, but it was a bad day. For her, she had a very good day, Nicola Sturgeon, but the winner really was David Cameron. And I understand that never, apart from Harold Wilson in 1966, has an incumbent party both increased its seats and the number of votes, its share of the votes. So he now has a clear mandate. He still has got the hurdle of having to deal with the SNP, but the SNP it was rather a hollow victory, because she thought this victory would enable her to be the powerhouse with Labour. Now Labour has disappeared. She hasn't got the power that she thought she would have. What he's got to do is to unite the United Kingdom. And it's very interesting just how exact Bible prophecy is. In Ezekiel chapter 38 and verse 13, it talks about the merchants of Tarshish. Not the merchant of Tarshish, but the merchants. And that's what the United Kingdom is all about, isn't it? It's a collection of different nations, Northern Ireland, Wales, Scotland, England, coming together, working together, each in their own right are trading nations, but united. So it is the merchants of Tarshish. And you may remember this from Scotland. It's interesting, Scotland thinks it has a big voice, but it's only got a tenth the population of England. Only 8% of the UK is Scottish. England has by far the greatest population, 84%. And David Cameron, this was his aim to unite the UK, make it one nation, make Great Britain greater. And in the purpose of God, we feel that that is right. That is what is to happen. Tarshish is to be a strong power again. It was weakened after the First World War, Second World War, left the Middle East. Now she's being drawn back, just at the time when America is withdrawing. The first thing that David Cameron is seeking is to repatriate powers to Westminster. What you have to watch is up in the corner there. You see, it's the EU that can cast a shadow on his desires. He wants so many things, but is the EU going to give him those powers? And we can be pretty sure that they're not. At the moment, he's making a tour of the different capitals of the EU, trying to encourage them to join in his campaign to repatriate powers. And he has quite a lot of sympathy in many countries. Many countries do feel the EU has gone too far. But we know that the people that drive the EU are not going to let go of the power that they have gained. And so he will find at the end of the road that he won't have made the changes that he wants, and the route will be an exit. So he has promised a referendum by 2017. What was quite interesting was an interesting article, quite a few charts, it's just one of them, just showing how troublesome Britain is to the EU. This is a summary of all the times when countries have been in the minority. In other words, they disagreed with what the majority are wanting to do. And Britain here, 85 times in this period has been in minority. And Germany and the Netherlands, Germany's next to about 15, Netherlands about 35, and so, yeah. So twice as often Britain is on the opposing side, not happy with the way that the EU wants. Because Britain's got a completely different outlook. She's not a continental country. She's one with a Protestant background, entrepreneurial, wanting freedom to take her trade throughout the world. And what is very interesting is to see how Britain's trade with the EU has been falling. This was just earlier this week, the Daily Telegraph. British reliance on trade with the EU falls to an all-time low. The importance of the EU as UK's main trading partner appears to be dwindling, as the share of UK goods exported to the region fell to a record low in April. And the graph that accompanied it was quite interesting. That go back to 1999, and then 55% of British trade, 55% of British trade was to the EU, obviously 45 non-EU. Now, those lines crossed probably 2008, and now today, 45% trade with the EU and falling quite steeply. So Britain has, because she is a trading nation and because of the recession in the EU, has been forced to look to other markets, one of which, of course, is Israel and the Middle East, and she has been exploiting those markets, and it's showing in the figures that the EU is getting less and less important to Britain. So, as we say, one of the important markets is Israel, and it's been quite interesting how under David Cameron the government has made Israel a key market. They put a lot of money and effort into building trade with Israel. And this was 9th of June. It's a golden era for UK-Israel trade, says the business secretary. Now, the new business secretary is a very interesting person. He's from Pakistan originally. He was born in this country, but a great friend of Israel. And he was at a presentation dinner, Israeli and UK business people together. And this is what he had to say. In the past few years have been a golden era. What really excites me are the possibilities for the years that lie ahead. Bilateral trade between the countries is currently worth more than 4.5 billion. Mr. Jarvis said he had high regard for Israel. It's one of the many reasons I've long admired the country. I've travelled there extensively, both for business and with family. My department, including UKTI, are working hard to boost Anglo-Israeli trade and investment. And I, as business secretary, will do anything I can to support and promote it. So there in the British government as the Secretary of State is a man who's very keen on boosting the trade with Israel. And one of the interesting things is the advantage to the Israelis with dealing with Britain as opposed to dealing with California, which has been their traditional market, because the Israelis are very keen on technology and that kind of thing. So Silicon Valley was their traditional place. The Israelis would have the ideas that were taken to America to be developed. But the problem is that when it's 11 o'clock in the morning in Tel Aviv, it's 9 o'clock in Britain, so you can pick up the phone, do your business. I know they go to work earlier than that, but I'm just taking 9 o'clock being a simple time to illustrate this fact. Whereas 1 o'clock in the morning in California, and when it's 7 o'clock at night in Israel, it's 9 o'clock and you can pick up the phone. So for an Israeli company, you're working all day and then you're having to work half the night to do business with people on the other side of the world. So it's much easier to do business with Britain, and it's only a few hours flight away, only 2-hour time difference. And so Britain has been exploiting this fact, and there have been an awful lot of Israeli companies which are now coming to Britain to have the British to develop the markets for them. Israel also is reaping the benefits of the Tamar gas reserves. It was interesting that in spite of the war in Gaza last year, headline in February was the economy rebounded from Protective Edge, which was the name of the war, with a 7.2% growth in the fourth quarter. And the Bank of Israel said that the natural gas, the feedback from that, has cancelled out the negative economic effects of the Protective Edge. And that golden era headline we've looked at. And now Israel is preparing to export gas to Egypt and gas to Jordan. Israel is making use of the wonderful benefits that this natural gas, which they found off the coast, and using it not only for her own benefit, but as a means of doing business with her neighbours. Israel's philosophy is, if we trade with nations, they won't be our enemies. And this is beginning to filter down. There was obviously initially great opposition, both in Egypt and in Jordan, that they felt that they shouldn't do business with Israel. But because the economic benefits are so great, the opposition to such dealings is fading. And at the end of February, Israel and Jordan and the Palestinians did sign an agreement on the first stage in this Red Sea, Dead Sea water project. I was quite horrified. I had to look back to 1993 was when I first talked about this, and my first milestones with my father, 2 years before he died. That this was on the cards then, this idea of taking water from the Red Sea, the Gulf of Aqaba, generating electricity as it fell down to the Dead Sea, driving a desalination plant, so it would supply water. But the idea was that they would raise the level in the Dead Sea, which is falling every year. So they would get the benefit of putting water into the Dead Sea, generating electricity, and using that electricity to drive desalination plants to provide water. Well, it has taken, 22 years. It's now reached the stage where they are very actively going through the first stage. It still lies quite a few years ahead, even if everything goes smoothly. But it's interesting, Jordan can see the benefits of working with Israel. It's a win-win situation for everybody. So, we saw very briefly that Britain has been working with Israel. She's also working very much with Saudi Arabia and the Gulf states. This is her traditional stomping ground. And again, just like Israel, Saudi Arabia has been targeted as a high growth and a priority market because this is where the money is. And Britain is very keen to do business with anybody that's got money. And one of the things that Saudi Arabia is doing, as we shall see in a moment, is wanting to turn her economy away from being dependent upon gas and oil. She's seen the difficulties that causes. And so she is determined to transform the country and make it a trading nation. And we shall see the interest in that in just a moment. But this is something that Britain is very good at, helping setting up the infrastructure and that kind of thing. And so Britain feels that there is a big market here. Britain does training, military training in Saudi Arabia. A lot of employees of BAE live and work in Saudi Arabia. And it brings in a lot of money to the government. But this port expansion reflects Saudi Arabia's economic growth. Major expansion of Saudi Arabia's ports infrastructure reflects a combination of continuing economic growth with the kingdom's key strategic location as a hub for international trade, as the largest and most diversified economy in the Middle East, and its status as the world's principal oil exporting country. As the Saudi government looks to see investment of upward of $10 billion in development of its ports infrastructures over the next decade, there will be increasing opportunities for UK companies in many areas. As I say, Britain, being a trading nation herself, is very skilled at putting in the infrastructure that is needed for these things. And one of the 4 cities that are being built, brand new cities in the middle of nowhere, as it were, this King Abdullah Economic City, this is the sea here, and various zones for living and working, trading, ring road roundabout. This is well on its way to being, that's just an artistic drawing, but it's well on its way to becoming a fact. And so there are 4 main ports being considered, but because Saudi Arabia spans onto the Arabian Persian Gulf and the Red Sea here, she's got 2 long coastlines and is ideally situated for seaports and container terminals. So she's determined that she's going to change from just being dependent upon oil and gas to being a trading nation. Now, that, I think, is a very interesting thing. It's not essential for Scripture, but how interesting. Here we have Sheba, the first of the list of these nations which are supportive of Israel, are obviously working with the merchants of Tarshish and the young lions, that she herself is becoming a trading nation. As I say, it wouldn't be essential for this prophecy, but it's just one of those fascinating things that just in these last times we have this change in the working of the Sheba. Again, it's interesting, and I've said this before, the order at which God reveals these things to Ezekiel, that it's Sheba, Dedan, the merchants of Tarshish, and the young lions thereof. Now, a few years ago, we would have reversed that order, wouldn't we? We would have said the main power in that region is the United States, the young lion, one of the young lions. Britain, yeah. But to think of Arab nations being part of a group who, the purpose is that they're saying to Gog, who's coming down against Israel, aren't you come to take a spoil as you gather your company to take a prey, to carry away silver and gold, to take away cattle and goods, to take a great spoil? It's obvious that these nations, this group of nations, are nations who despise what Gog is doing coming against Israel. Now, a few years ago, Sheba and Dedan will be cheering Gog on, getting rid of Israel, their great enemy. But you see, the situation has now completely changed. And the priorities have now changed. And it's not too difficult to see how Saudi Arabia and the Gulf states will be foremost in standing up for Israel. Don't manage to achieve anything from the wording here, but it's their attitude that is of interest here. We know how much America is pulling out. We know that Britain is being drawn in. And so we can see that at the time of the end, this will be the correct order. How interesting, because, Britain 2,500 years ago. The Gulf states are more and more coming together to be a power bloc to the south of Iran in the north. They've agreed to set up a joint force. They've been talking about it for a long time. It still hasn't yet quite come to fruition, but they are settling their differences, and together with Jordan and with Egypt are pooling their resources in order to become a stronger power. And again, this is what the scripture necessitates. And so, we see that kind of thing happening. And then the extra layer, which again we've been seeing in the past few years, is how Israel has been working behind the scenes with these Arab nations. And this was last Friday's Debka. A rare partnership, years of secret Saudi-Israeli dialogue ripens into common policy against Iran. And it was covering a meeting between Israeli Foreign Minister and the former Saudi government advisor. The Bloomberg writer disclosed that the emissaries of the two governments had secretly met 5 times in recent months to talk about Iran. These meetings took place in India, Italy, Czech Republic, though the first encounter in Washington was the first public occasion. And I went on to say that clandestine Saudi-Israeli parleys have been going on for at least 4 years, since 2011. All of them, apart from 2, taking place in Jordan. So there have been many strands to these talks between the Israeli leaders, and especially the intelligence service, Israeli intelligence service, and the intelligence agencies and the leaders of these Arab nations. Because they have a common enemy, Iran, and they're prepared to settle their differences in order to help each other against this common foe. So it's wonderful how the angels have been working, turning the situation around in just a few years. Things have changed so completely. It's very encouraging. And we're given a brief glimpse of how the angels work behind the scenes in that passage from Daniel chapter 10, where, as it were, the curtain is just drawn aside, and we see these Michael coming to help Gabriel, and it took 21 days to get this Persian king to go the way that the angels required. They can't just press a button and people automatically do things. They have to work in advance, often tens of years, sometimes hundreds of years in advance, in order that when the time comes, then the natural outcome will be that these people will go in a certain direction, the direction that God wants. And so we have to live by faith to know that the angels are working, and we see them not only in the world around us, but they see them working in our lives too. The Middle East, like Europe, is torn by religion. People think that religious wars belong to history, but we know that at the moment very much religion is to the fore of what Russia is doing in Crimea and in Ukraine. A contest between Roman Catholicism and the Russian Orthodox is also bubbling behind the scenes, and efforts to try and bring the two together. But it's exactly the same in the Middle East. You've got these two power blocks, the Shia and the Sunnis, totally opposed to each other, fighting among themselves. And of course the problem was that when Britain and France at the end of World War II carved up the area, they just more or less drew lines in the sand and ignored the religious differences between these nations. And these problems now come home to roost. And we see the break-up of big blocks of nations and smaller groups of peoples on sectarian lines coming to the fore. So we see at the moment a power bloc in the north based around Iran, covering Iraq and Syria. Another power bloc to the south, revolving very much around Saudi Arabia and the Gulf states, including Egypt and Jordan and Israel. And then, as it were, superimposed upon them is this little power of ISIS, which has hit the news in the past 18 months or so, and at the moment is a thorn in the flesh to the nations here. Now, we've looked at this in the past, so I'm not proposing to deal with it because we haven't got time, but from Numbers chapter 24, we know that at the time of the end, when Gog comes down into the land, to use the language of Ezekiel 38, there is a need, in the words of Balaam, to deal with Kittim, Cyprus, where the British have their bases, Asher, which is where Syria was between the rivers, and Eber, which is Israel. Now, it is so interesting that ISIS is between the rivers, and here is a power bloc that is opposed to Iran, is opposed to Russia. And so if Russia is to come down with Iran as her chief companion, it is clear that they've got to deal with British forces on Cyprus, Kittim, and they've got to deal with a power that is in Asher. And it looks very much, as we're seeing today, what that power is, this ISIS power. So if that's the case, then we don't expect to see ISIS expanding greatly and taking over the whole area, but to be confined between the rivers, but to be a power which is opposed to Iran and to Russia and to Israel, of course. There are 3 choke points to shipping in this region. One is the Straits of Hormuz. The other is this very narrow passageway at the bottom of the Red Sea. And the other is the Suez Canal. Now, the Suez Canal is interesting because the Egyptians have, off their own bat, started, well, they're well on the way. In fact, they're talking about being open, I think, about September, October. They're building a parallel Suez Canal so they can increase the traffic there. But this choke point here are very vital to shipping because a lot of oil comes down in ships here, a lot of trade comes up through here to Europe. And Iran has got control over that choke point there. If she wants to block it off, she has the capacity to do that. And she's very keen on being involved in Yemen in order that she might have control over this choke point. Then she can hold the West to ransom. Now, we know that this is the region of the ancient Sheba. And at the moment, Sheba, although it's in the list in Ezekiel 38, Sheba and Dedan, we've been seeing Dedan, Saudi Arabia, and these Gulf states there. But Sheba has been the problem. She is very much under the influence of Iran at the moment. And it is so interesting that Saudi Arabia has taken upon herself to try to dislodge the Iranian influence in Yemen and to bring Yemen back into the fold here. Because originally, when the Gulf states were formed, the intention was that Yemen would join the Gulf states. But because of Iran and the work that's gone in there, it's become a hostile nation. So, again, it is a sign of the times that Saudi Arabia feels it is strong enough to send her bombs and planes to try and take back this region there. It's proving a very long and very hard battle. It's very tough terrain. It will take them a long time, but from scriptures we know that this area has to come under the orbit of Saudi Arabia, not under Iran's orbit. It's part of the opposition to Gog and Iran, Persia. So we're beginning to see a change in this region. So we've seen surprise results in the Israeli elections, brought religious parties to power, and put pay to a prospect of a Palestinian state. We've also seen surprise results in the British elections, right-wing party seeking to renegotiate with the EU. We've seen how Britain has been drawn to Israel and the Middle East, build up her trade. And we see that Israel is booming. We've also, very briefly, seen that how Iran is seeking to influence the north and Saudi Arabia is seeking to influence the south. So we're getting this north-south split. Saudi Arabia is moving to becoming a trading nation, which, as I said, was a very interesting point. It's welding the nations of the Gulf together, and having Israel as a background partner, and using its military might in Yemen because the United States won't do it. So interesting things are happening, and we know that all this is leading to this development of the Nebuchadnezzar's image. We know in the past bits of it have come and gone, the various metals have come and gone. Characteristic of all those metals was that they had influence and power over the nation of Israel. The nation of Israel was scattered. The purpose of Nebuchadnezzar's image comes to a halt. Israel regathers. That work of building the image can restart. And we know how we're in the stage of the final stage, which is providing the feet and toes so that the image can stand on its feet. We know that it is to be an amalgamation of many nations on the territory of the former elements of the Nebuchadnezzar's image. They're going to come together. But this characteristic is that it has iron clay feet. Now, I haven't time to look at that, but this is the situation of today. And we know that its aim is exactly the same as was the aim of the four previous metals that went before, to take control of Israel. This is the kingdoms of men banding together in order to come against the land of Israel. And under Gog and his companions, they will succeed. Israel as a nation, as we know it today, will be destroyed because what Israel has is of no use to its coming king. He needs a fresh start. He needs a people who have gone through the fire of persecution and trial and have emerged seeking help from their God. And from such a nation that has come through that fire, they can build the kingdom of God. And we know that it is on the mountains of Israel that the little stone power will smite that image, it will be destroyed, and the kingdom of God set up in its place. So we've looked briefly, we've gone round and looked at Israel and the Middle East, so let's return now to the split in the north between east and west. It's something we've looked at, but things are moving forward apace. What we're looking for is a division of the nations of Europe and Russia into two camps, a beast camp and a dragon camp, and guided by history as to where the division was in time past. Interestingly, just at a time, this map is 395, and that was just at a time when the control of Britain by Rome was disappearing by about, I think about 405, the Romans had departed our shores, and Britain's got on with their lives again. So we're looking that somewhere in this region here will be the division in the future. There has to be two legs to this image, an eastern leg and a western leg. So countries like Ukraine, Romania, Bulgaria, Greece, and Cyprus, and Turkey, clearly, although Romania and Bulgaria and Greece and Cyprus are all in the EU, but that isn't the long-term situation. They've got to be drawn eastwards. And that's exactly what we are seeing. Now, we saw in the prophecy day how Russia has been making her steps southward in preparation for this invasion of Israel. She's laying the foundations to it. Started in 2008 with going into Georgia, and then last year going into Ukraine and seizing of Crimea. And now she's got her eyes on these southern nations here, like Turkey and Greece and Cyprus. We know that she has to have control. These have to come within her orbit. And what's so fascinating is to... Somebody just walking through the car park, and that's okay. Just walking around the side. What is so fascinating is to see the speed at which these nations are being drawn to this eastern side, to Russia. So if we just look at Greece, we know how there were elections back in January, and Alexis Tsipras came to power, and is trying to grapple with the deep burdens that Greece has. She is very heavily indebted because she joined the euro. She wasn't economically strong enough to join, and she is in great debt. But they've managed so far to pay their way, but crunch time is coming. And the various payments which should have been made in the beginning of this month have all been pushed off to the end of the month. And so if we look at the chart of what they're due to pay at the end of this month, it's pretty frightening. Because, as I say, they should have paid these, but didn't, and said, well, we'll pay them at the end, and add on their bill that they have for wages and pensions. 2 billion British pounds is due, and they just haven't got that kind of money. And so everybody's expecting that they're going to default. If they default, then we'll set in process an eventual pushing out from the EU and the euro, and probably out of the EU, and probably going back to the drachma. it is said, rumour has it, that the drachma notes and coins are already there waiting. But the interesting thing is the West seems to be doing their level best to drive her into the arms of Russia. And in today's Telegraph, just give one more click, we can't afford to lose Greece to Russia. The country may not be able to stay in the euro, but it must be given reason to resist Moscow. The British can see, well, it's madness to allow Greece to fall into the Russian orbit. But Germany and the others, I think, are so tired of all the battles that they have had that I think they will be quite happy to say goodbye to Greece. And he's been talking to the Russians, he's been talking to the Chinese. There are Chinese and the Russians are waiting in the wings to pick up the pieces. Russia has said, we're quite happy to lend you money so that this Turkish stream extension, which we'll look at in a moment, can be extended right into Greece. He's actually going to meet Putin. There's a big conference up at St. Petersburg on Friday, and they're going to have a meeting on the sides of that conference. And the news that I picked up from that Russian pivot, Greek Prime Minister schedules Putin meeting ahead of a layman weekend. People think that the crunch might come as soon as this weekend, and just like Lehman Brothers, suddenly collapsed, so Greece might. But he's going to be there talking to the Russians. The Kremlin spokesman did not reveal what the two men will be talking about. There are a number of possibilities, including a multi-million euro advance on Greece's Turkish stream revenue, and the arrangement of a loan from the BRICS Bank. Now, this is a new bank which Russia and Brazil and various China, big countries, are putting together. And interestingly, Greece has been invited to join them. And if she did, she would then be eligible for a loan immediately, and will be allowed to tender its paid-in capital in instalments to ease the financial burden of joining. Further, Russia will host this year's BRICS summit in Alpha, where the $100 billion bank will officially be launched. They've got lots of money, and Greece could serve as a kind of pilot project for the new fund. So you can see the angels, well, we don't know whether this is going to work out, but you can see the possibilities that just at a time when Greece has to say goodbye, here are doors open where she can be drawn into Russia's orbit and control. Cyprus too is in a similar situation. It's a very poor country, heavily indebted, divided between the Turkish north and the south, which is in the EU. Britain has her two sovereign bases there, so it's a very important country to Britain. She has her naval bases and the Air Force base there for looking after the Middle East. We know back in the end of February that Cyprus signed an agreement with Russia to allow the Russian Navy to have access to the Mediterranean island, and that, of course, was rather a slap in the face to Britain. But this is how Russia has been working. She's been trying to find cracks in Europe's unity, as it says there, and working her way in to impose her control on these places. And Cyprus is very dependent upon Russia even now, even though it's part of the EU. There are a lot of Russians have their wealth there and houses in Cyprus, and so it's very dependent upon the Russians. So you can see it wouldn't take much to again push Cyprus into the arms of Russia. So just finally, Turkey. We know how important Turkey is in Russia's plans. Russia has been building up her troops in Crimea and the areas around there. But the weakness of having a navy in the Black Sea is that you have to come through these two very narrow straits to get into the Mediterranean or anywhere in the world. And so it is important that Russia can be guaranteed passageway through there. And the only way to be guaranteed passageway is to have control of these countries. Well, she can't do that overtly. She can only do it overtly at the moment. But she is making sure that Turkey is brought within her orbit. And she's doing that by means of energy. At the moment there exists this blue stream which takes Russian gas straight into Ankara. Russia has said that she will enlarge that pipe, put more gas through there. But the scheme which had been arranged with the EU, which was to ship gas across the Black Sea and into Bulgaria and up into Europe, has died a death. And instead, Putin is determined to carry on with that, but divert it into this region of Turkey, water industry there, and extend it onto the borders of Greece, and has now been saying to Greece, we'll pay the money for the pipeline to be extended into Greece, so that both Greece and Turkey can take advantage of decent prices for gas. And if the EU wants to purchase gas, well, they'll have to purchase it from Turkey, which of course won't go down very well. But it is, again, it's a win-win situation for Russia, as it is for Turkey and would be for Greece. But it is a Trojan horse. It's his means of getting influence upon this country. And we can see that it will eventually lead to Russia moving down into Turkey to take control. So, I just say that was finally, didn't I? Sorry, there's a few more. Just very briefly, the situation in Ukraine. The world is very worried. Russia is putting a lot of forces on the eastern border of Ukraine. And this NATO leader, admittedly it's now 6 weeks old, but many of their actions are consistent with preparations for another offensive. Now, there's a very interesting article in the Times back on the 11th of June, which drew parallels between the situation between World War I and World War II. In 1933, the Oxford Union said that they weren't prepared to fight for king or country. And Germany took great comfort from that and began its preparations for eventually invading Britain. And it's saying, well, in the same way, Putin is taking great comfort from the fact that today the nations of Europe are not prepared to fight. And the Pew Research Centre, the American Research Centre, have just conducted a very interesting poll which showed that the majority of correspondents in France, Italy and Germany said that their country should not use military force to defend an ally from an attack by Russia. Only 38% of Germans are ready, it seems, to fight to protect NATO's eastern flank. So, from Moscow, it would seem as if the post-war Western order is fragmenting. Since NATO populations no longer have the stomach for combat, since Western Europeans see no compelling reason to defend their allies further east, Russia feels free to gnaw away at the credibility of Article 5. Article 5 says, if one NATO member is attacked, we will come and support you. So, interestingly, we can see how over the past few months he's been prodding and pushing at the various NATO members to test their readiness, and the peoples are growing weary of it, and he will soon see that he'll be free to walk in and take more of Ukraine. Stratfor did forecast 3 scenarios. One was an extension from the region we have at the moment to come down here, because what she desperately needs is a route through to Crimea. Crimea is landlocked, as it were. She can only get there by sea. So she needs to take more land in order that she can have free access to Crimea. So that was one scenario. Another was a more extensive one, pushing right through to Transnistria and taking Odessa so that Ukraine would be landlocked. The third alternative was not only to come here, but to go all the way up to Kiev and take right up to the Dnieper River. And in fact, Stratfor's own favourite was that that's what Russia would do. They worked out it would take them about 2 weeks and involve about 100,000 troops. Well, we can be sure that Russia isn't finished yet. She has to take control of this region. And it was interesting on the May Day, the sabre rattling that Russia was doing. Vast display of power. She regards the West as unfriendly. She feels she needs to defend herself. And in her eyes, it was Russia that won World War II. And probably a lot of truth in that. They lost 20 million, didn't they, in that war? So they're concentrating on building up their military so that they can withstand what they regard as the aggression of America and NATO in wanting to push further and further east. She is pushing back. And again, that's what we've been waiting for, so the eastern leg and the western legs can be formed. So brothers and sisters, we're building up to the time when it might not be Putin the leader at the time, but a Russian rogue will come with a mighty army, mainly Christian countries, coming down to take Asher, to take Eba, to take Egypt, and to take control of the Middle East. And it is then, Christ having come back, judgment having taken place, saints having been prepared, then Israel's saviours will be ready to come and demonstrate to the world that Israel is God's people, that Christianity and the Muslims are astray from the truth, and that the true God is Israel's God, and his Son has come to take control. And we, brothers and sisters, we live in hope of being there, assisting in this wonderful work. And our worlds are going to change forever. All that we have will disappear. We will go to the judgment seat without our families, without our brothers and sisters, without our bank balances, without our wealth. What we will be taking to the judgment seat is what we've got in our minds. How we have filled them with the word of God is what we will be judged upon. And so, brothers and sisters, it behoves us to look at our lives, because we are so close. We've seen so much happen. And we know that the Master has to come long before the nations come down into Israel. So that coming is very, very near. So, brothers and sisters, let us be fully awake and fully watching for our Master's coming.